All right, Tony Genova, or as they call you here in the U.S., Genova, but I'm sure in Sicily, a couple generations back, it was Genova. Man, you've got a story because normally an attorney just has hey, grew up, went to law school, and became an attorney, and it's just uphill from there, right? Just building a career. You had a bit of a hiccup, a couple years in prison. That's going to be pretty interesting to talk about, but also the way you came out of it and the way you came back in a strong way. So tell us first, Tony, where'd you grow up? What was life like as a kid?
So I grew up in New York and Long Island. Um, Mom born in Ireland, father first generation Italian. I lived in the North Shore, lived on the water. Actually became an outboard motor mechanic, and that kind of brought me during a winter in 1979. I ended up going to school down at Daytona Beach because I wanted to. Each winter would get no work for the marine industry in the winter, so you'd start bartending and not really accomplishing much. So I decided I'd go to school. I was 19. I went to school in Daytona Beach Community College, and the reason I mention it is because this is when I decided to go to law school. I had no intention of going to law school. I love being a mechanic. I love living where I lived. I love this little town. And anyway, so while I was in Daytona, I was going to Daytona Beach Community College, and I had a next door neighbor who went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical. He was trained to be a pilot. So I'm training, I'm already a mechanic, but I'm there to get certified, and he's already a pilot, but he's there to get hours for his commercial and things like that. And but we lived in these two little apartments next to each other, and so one day we get a knock at the door from these old folks, and they're like, "Oh, we have this building next door. It's a single little house, and we live. This is in Daytona. We live like a block away from the water. It was beautiful, and and we live in little cubby holes. And this lady was offering us this two-bedroom, two-bathroom house with a little yard and a park, a driveway, and it was the same price. And she's like, why don't you guys? And so we didn't have leases. We're like, okay, so we move in. And I, for whatever reason, before I left the one place, I at least on a napkin wrote out what the month's rent was going to be, and I had them sign it and everything. So I don't know, 3, 4 weeks later, Saturday morning, early on a Saturday morning, they come knocking at our door, and they say, "Oh, you got to leave." I'm like, "What?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, our friend's daughter is getting divorced, and she's moving back, and we told them that she could live here." I'm like, "Well, it doesn't work that way. I mean, we just signed a lease for a year." And she's like, "No, no, no, there's no lease." So they call the police. The police come. The police look at the napkin, and they're like, "Look, you took their money. They just moved in. You said they're in for a year, and now you want them to leave." And they're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "No." And they go, "Oh man," and they leave. So that Monday, we get back from school, and we notice, now this is in Daytona. Daytona, a little bit on the hot side. It was August or whatever, and all the air conditioners are gone.
Oof.
So we thought, well played, well played, landlord. But as we're looking at the empty windows and we're pondering what happened, we have a lady next door that comes down. She went to school with my roommate at Embry-Riddle, but she didn't have a class that day. And she's like, "Yeah, you should have seen it. The old folks that rented to you, they came here, and the two of them, they struggled and they weren't going to leave. You should have seen them fighting with these air conditioners all day and this and that." And so so I'm like, okay. And so we just decided, let's just move, that was it. So that was the last, so we moved. Fast forward the next spring, and I get pulled over for speeding, and I get arrested. I get pulled over speeding, and the guy says, "Oh, you have a warrant." I'm like, "A warrant? For stealing the air conditioners?"
Oh boy.
I'm like, "What? What?" And so I get a court date. I go to court, and I tell the judge, "I didn't steal any air conditioner. I have a witness. They're like, oh, just pay $30. I'm like, no, I'm not going to pay $30. He goes, all right, then I'm going to set it for trial. I said, fine, set it for trial. I said, but judge, because now it's like the end of February. And I said, I made the mistake of telling them, number one, I'm a New Yorker. I'm here as a student. I'm going home for Easter and I'm coming back in, April, whatever. Please don't set the trial during that time. And he's like, oh, okay. So I get back. Of course, I check the mail, and there's my court date for the week past, okay, which I had missed. Now I got another warrant, right? So I'm working at this fancy restaurant. I'm a cook, and I got to wear like a tuxedo. It's across the street from the Speedway, the Daytona Beach Speedway.
Daytona Beach. Yeah. Daytona 500.
So I call up the judge's, I call the office, and the assistant says, oh, well, he says you can come by. The judge says you can come by around 3:30. I said, okay, great. So now I go to the courthouse on my way to work. So I'm in a tuxedo, right? Judge sends me to jail. I'm telling the judge, well, this is what you told me. And he's like, whatever. And next thing I know, I'm in jail. And so it wasn't just like the injustice that I kind of felt, okay, but as I'm sitting there now, because I don't have anybody there, I don't have money for a bond or a bail, or I don't have anything, so I'm stuck there. And nobody even knew that I was even going to the court. I mean, nobody knew anything, literally. My parents didn't know. I was just like, oh my God. And so I don't know how long I was there altogether, but at some point, just looking at these people, and mind you, this is in Daytona Beach, 1979. It's during spring break and bike week. So the jail was packed with like bike, and you could smoke in the jail back then. It was all bikers and spring breaker. It was nuts.
And you were there looking like a butler.
Oh no, and I was in a tuxedo with a cummerbund and everything. But after the shock wore off, and I'm just kind of sitting there looking at these people, I'm realizing that how many of these people didn't really do anything, okay? And now, because of a judge or whatever, they're here, even for a weekend, they're going to get out, they're going to have no job, they're going to have no money, all their stuff's going to be, their girlfriend or somebody's going to throw their stuff on the street. Their life is over. It is such a tailspin. And so at some point, and then all of a sudden, I got this thought: you got to be a lawyer. You got to help these people. And I went to the phone, and somebody was on the phone. I said, "Excuse me." And I actually took the phone. I hung up. I called my mom, and I said, "Mom." She goes, "Yeah." I said, "Mom, I'm going to go to law school." She said, "Okay." And then she said, "What's all that noise?" And I said, "I'll tell you later." She died a couple of years ago. I never got to tell her. But that was my journey. So then I finished my schooling there in Daytona, moved to New York, stayed at my parents', took one semester at SUNY Old Westbury, so between that and my good grades in Daytona, I got into SUNY Albany, which is a university, State University of New York at Albany. And then I got a scholarship to University of Miami in 1983.
For law school.
That's when I came down for law school, right?
So
I came down in 1983.
So you start practicing law, and once you graduated, was it criminal defense?
So not originally. I had planned on doing family law from the start. But I was always a paralegal or a law clerk for criminal defense attorneys, and I had interned with the public defender's office and things of that nature. But I really wanted to go into family law and not be a part of that, because at that point I had already been, using drugs and, smoking marijuana and abusing alcohol. But after that incident in Daytona, I started getting like bad panic attacks and things like that. So now I'm self-medicating with alcohol. So now the alcohol.
Did the drugs make those panic attacks worse?
Well, when cocaine was added years later, it was just like throwing gas on it, because by then I was on Xanax for the panic, but I was still drinking. And then you add the cocaine, it was just like,
And this is 1983, mid 80s, Miami, right?
Yeah. So if you like people, you would have to watch Miami Vice
Hmm.
and look, and somebody who watches Miami Vice now would look at it and say, where is this dirty place? They don't realize this is Brickell. This is South Beach was a dirty, scary place
Yeah.
in the early 80s. You wouldn't step foot. It was dark. There were no lights. There was no nightlife. It was a scary place.
Yeah, they've turned that around.
They
So
turned it
the
around. But
you've seen the Cocaine Cowboys documentary. Did you live some of that? Did you see that?
well, yeah, so I started out. Now I'm a paralegal for this fellow who ends up running to be a judge, ends up becoming a judge. Okay. This attorney had been working on a number of criminal cases as a specially appointed public defender. Kind of ironic how this whole thing works out, but he's a specially appointed public defender, which was when the public defender has a conflict. Two guys get arrested for murder on the same case. Public defender can't represent two. They go now to this wheel. So this gentleman was had a number of these murder cases, and then he'd been elected judge. In the meantime, I got my license in March of '87, and I was in the process of opening my family law practice in Kendall next to Don Carter's bowling alley. He calls me up sometime in late November, I think it was, saying, "Hey, I got elected, and I have this murder trial, and if I don't try it, I'm not gonna, I'm gonna have to give it to somebody else, and they'll get paid, and it's all ready, and you know the case really well, and blah blah blah." So I'm like, okay. So my first time in court is doing a cross-examination of a lead detective in a first-degree murder case that was high profile because the victim happened to be a very famous jockey who was buying crack cocaine and got murdered, and my client was accused. And so my client's found not guilty. Well, that was it for the family law practice. I was like, oh,
Found a new calling.
I was hooked. And so I end up just getting a little apartment by the court. So everything I have is in Kendall. And then all of a sudden I pull up the roots and I get a little apartment across the street from the criminal courthouse. I got a little office across the street from the criminal courthouse. And now a couple days later, well, a couple weeks later, I'm at a party for the person that just became a judge.
Hmm.
Okay.
Your old boss.
And at that party is another judge who did not get reelected. Very famous judge. Anyway, and I don't want to put their names out there. This isn't about them. But anyway, the one that just became a judge says, "Hey, do you know Tony?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, I've seen him a couple of times because I don't know anybody. I just dropped in from nowhere. This is an established Dade County close-knit group of people in this courthouse." And Phil says, "Well, Tony just got his license and he just won this recent case for me." And he's like, "Really?" And so he says that the other person that didn't become that lost his judgeship says, "Well, everybody in town promised me, oh, if you don't get reelected, we got a place for you." But of course, he didn't get reelected and everybody scurried and now he's twisted in the wind with nothing. So I said, "Well, come with me." So we became partners. This is in January of '88. And to this day, he's up in his 70s. I still try cases with him. Very famous fella.
And you guys focus on criminal law and family law now?
So I didn't do any family at that time. I just started doing criminal. And so then the next thing was, so again, here's the irony. The attorney that asked me to come help him was because he had this specially appointed public defender case. Now this person is a judge, right? And years are going by, 2 years exactly. And this judge doesn't give me one court appointment in the whole 2 years. And I'm thinking, do I offend, right? Did I do something wrong? I thought it was really weird, you know. So one night I'm out with a bunch of my investigators and whatnot, and all of a sudden all our pagers are going off. Okay. Well, because Operation Courtroom just hit the fan and they just arrested 11 judges and bailiffs and 22 lawyers for manipulating the specially appointed court appointed system and paying kickbacks. You know, they had a group of lawyers who would get the appointments but kick back a percentage to the judge on
Good thing you never got appointed.
So yeah, and so yeah, good thing is right. And then the judge that I work for, that I tried that case with, is the only one that was found not guilty in the federal trial. And his lawyer was Alcee Hastings. And the only reason Alcee Hastings was his lawyer was because Alcee Hastings, who was a federal judge prior, got impeached, the only federal judge I know to get impeached, and now he's back in private practice, and that's the only reason he was available to represent Phil, the gentleman, and he was found not guilty.
But then Alcee Hastings end up in jail at some point?
I think that was prior to him getting impeached, but okay. I don't remember. It's been a while.
Yeah.
So Alcee represented, and that was pretty much the end of the court-appointed system as we knew it at that point. So, but in between, you know, it's funny. I realized that now I tried that murder case, and there were other murder cases that I got right after that, and I realized that all of the murder cases, they go to certain people on this group of lawyers who qualify. So as quickly as I could, I got qualified, and then I would get other lawyers that didn't have the opportunities, you know, as a second chair, because then they could get their foot in the door to actually get these, you know, a first chair appointment. So I'm trying to help people, you know, get into that. And then of course it imploded. But in my first 4 or 5 years, I won 3-4 murder trials. The first one as a second chair, all the others as myself, you know, not even a first chair, as myself, and won my first couple federal trials. Really successful and busy and money and again.
And where was at this point? What was your addictions? Were they going strong? Were they under control? What was happening?
Well, the panic and the anxiety got so bad at that point. So somewhere around those 91, 92, it was so bad that if I left my apartment, let's say, to go to the courthouse, I'd pull out of the parking garage and my hands would go numb, and I'd start getting, you know, and I'd start losing, you know, and I'd have to wait there. Or if I got on I-95, I wouldn't make it down the ramp, and I'd be there for like 45 minutes. It was so debilitating. And so then finally somebody convinced me that there were medications and there was help, you know, but I guess by that point, you know, I had been self-medicating with alcohol so much and then the solution, okay, was Xanax, which is benzodiazepine, which essentially numbs the frontal cortex that makes the decisions not to do these things. Okay. So I've been self-medicating with the alcohol. Now the Xanax comes in to make everything seem okay and cloud my decision-making further, as if my moral compass wasn't already spinning wildly.
And when did this start? As a kid, did you have addictions?
No, I think, again, I don't even know. The only addiction I would say, okay, because again, I used alcohol and then I self-medicated with it. I think the addiction really was when cocaine entered the picture in like 90, 91.
And how normal was that in Miami at that time? Did you see it everywhere?
Okay, so let me just give you a weird little story, okay, to tell you. I just was introduced to and was marrying my second wife, the mother of my child, this Cuban lady. She was an attorney at the time. And while we're dating, on our first date, actually, and it was my two investigators that introduced me to her because that was their wife's niece. And so they're explaining the story of how everybody knows everybody. And so it turns out that my soon-to-be wife father was a big drug dealer. And one of my investigators was supposed to be watching him at times. And then he ends up getting murdered in this hotel in Coral Gables.
The old man?
The father of this lady, my soon-to-be second wife. And to make matters worse, the person gets arrested, goes to trial, he's found not guilty, and the judge is none other than my partner, who I just became partners with.
Wow.
Right? So the only person I didn't really care for is this. So, but that's just to give you an idea of how prevalent, and you didn't really have to go far back then to find that kind of a story.
A drug dealer, a drug addict, right? It was everywhere.
Biscayne Boulevard, you had all these little hotels. You had the Shalimar and the Waldorf, and I had murder cases, multiple in every single one of those little. I mean, now you got fancy restaurants, and it's called Edgewater, and all these things. It was horrific. The violence.
You're right. You said it. I watched probably every episode of Miami Vice in the 80s. I was a kid and I loved it. And when I've seen them, the old, on YouTube, you can still find them. The old ones, you said, where is that? That's not Miami, because Miami's beautiful now, but it was a rough, seedy place. It was scary. Before we started recording, you and I were talking, as a little kid, you probably didn't know it, but you said you had ADD or ADHD. Does that have anything to do with addiction?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
How so?
Well, I think at the end of the day, my ants in the pants, as it were, okay, I think maybe if I had, I don't know about medication, but maybe some therapy or coping mechanisms when I was young, I wouldn't be a 64-year-old with ADHD untreated for 62 of those years.
Do you still have ants in the pants?
I do. I'm on medication, but yeah. And so it's funny, what they call it now is like neurodivergent. Okay. And is
that an inability to focus?
Well, it's more than that. So, and I didn't really ever hear the term. I was at a workshop. I'm on the executive council of the family law section of the Florida bar. And so I was at a leadership retreat, and one of the ladies is speaking on mental health. And she was talking about herself, who had ADHD and was neurodivergent. She was talking about how that complicates life for an attorney, because they tend to be big risk takers. They tend to take on things that are like, why would you get involved in something like, and so I'm thinking, well, geez, maybe that's why I started out doing murder cases. I mean, I did nothing. I don't think I tried anything but a murder case or a federal case for a couple of years. Then I don't think I tried my first little case. I don't know when I did,
You went big from the first moment.
And it's that risk taking. It's that,
you're seeking that adrenaline rush, maybe
control, so again, the addiction is, the impulse. So if you've got something affecting your impulse control, I'm, again, not an expert, but I'm assuming.
Sure. Do you seek adrenaline now? Like, is that excitement? Are you seeking it?
Well, so I'm 64 and I just became board certified in Maryland family law. I'm just now learning jiu-jitsu. I mean, I'm looking for the next experience, the next learning experience, the next something. Okay.
Well, I got to give it up to you because
out of an airplane, but
right. But at 64 to start, well, you started maybe a year ago or so, jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, 63.
Yeah. And we train in the same academy, and man, I see you training. I see you taking private lessons. So it's not just that you went for something and then you gave it up. It's not that shiny object or squirrel syndrome. You actually follow through with it.
And that's kind of it. and maybe that, ADHD doesn't necessarily have to be all bad. Okay. That focus and that tenacity and that, I don't know, intensity might be a product of that. And that might be, because, getting my license back, that wasn't easy, going from prison to my license to work, this stuff. But something, and of course it's God, but there's a bigger part of that, and I did want to talk about that.
Yeah, no, we will. All right, let's talk about jail. How'd you end up in jail? You went to prison. How'd you end up there? What happened? What year is this?
So this is right after 9/11. So I had filed a fraudulent bankruptcy in 96, 97. Long story. I had a debt that I was having a problem with my wife, believe it or not, paying it, because it had to do with my first wife's wedding. Okay. Which was bigger than the second wife's wedding. And so I ended up trying to put a square peg in a round hole and file bankruptcy to try and then of course I couldn't do that right, because I did it all fraudulently. And
what does that mean? You hid assets?
I hid assets, yeah. Plain and simple. And then
did you move it to some other people's names? Did you at least make an effort?
I one morning I was on my way to go to a jail, Metro West, to speak with this murder client who didn't speak English, and I brought one of it's kind of a partner, and we had a new. My first time I had, other than this judge that I've always had this handshake partnership with, this guy I actually had an agreement with, and he moved in my office in Brickell. And so he was with me when I made a stop at this jewelry store, and I dropped off all my jewelry, okay, to the jewelry store for repairs. And next thing I know, I'm getting subpoenas from the trustee for that jewelry store. Next thing I know, I get arrested for having a scuffle with this particular lawyer in a jury room, and I get arrested in court. I was on the front page of the local section the next day.
Wow.
Which is kind of funny, because there was a you don't have them these days. There was like a gossip column back then. There was this lady, Joan Fleischman, and she would have a field day with me and my shenanigans, So part of the reason, so I ended up taking a plea in November 30th of 2001, in the middle of trial. I took a plea on the bankruptcy fraud, and I just decided, I want to come back. So
come back as a lawyer
in the middle of trial to take a plea. I, in my head at that moment, had resigned myself to the fact that I got to come back. I haven't even left yet, but I resigned myself to the fact that I have to come back. And this is the best way to come back.
Come back.
To go out like a gentleman and go out saying, yeah, I did it, and I'm wrong.
And you mean,
I'm sorry.
Tony, you mean come back as an attorney. You want a chance to, yeah.
Because you don't come back fighting with everybody and professing your innocence and when it's not true, so
what was the sentence the plea deal? What was it?
Well, I ended up getting 15 months. And I had violated my bond. So I ended up self-surrendering. My sentencing wasn't supposed to be until February. And I was out on a $100,000 bond. I violated it.
How? What'd you do?
I picked up a DUI, and I had my son in the car. Terrible. And I look back and I realized that this was all to get me to an appointment I had. I didn't know I had it. So that happens, and a couple days. So the next chance she had, Joan Fleischman writes a little article about how I got a DUI while I'm out on bond, and the federal prosecutor saw it. And next thing I know, I get a call from my pretrial release officer, and I said, "Look, you don't have to file anything yet. Just tell me where to go." I just
You knew.
yeah, I dropped my son off at St. Rose of Lima to like pre-K or whatever. I drove down, and next time I saw him would be, other than at my sentencing, I saw him when I got out.
Wow. So, but that 15 months you served, those 15 months,
I served about 13 of it.
what what's it like? At that point, you'd been arrested, you'd been in jail a couple of times. What's it like to actually go into a prison and knowing you're going to be there a while, over a year?
Um, well, this time it was kind of crazy because, again, it wasn't like, your sentencing date is February, and then you got a surrender date, and it's like, because I've done this work. It's like watching paint dry. It's so painfully it's too slow. But me, because I violated the bond and got, the thing was in the newspaper
You
or Sunday,
accelerated it.
a phone call. It was like, next thing I know, I'm ready. I'm getting ready to go to New York and see my mother for Christmas. And I'm surrendering to prison on December 18th. She doesn't even know anything is happening.
Wow.
Imagine. And my mom, God bless her, never said a word to me about it. Every month sent me commissary, whatever the most she could send. Never asked. It just never came up.
Was your dad alive at that time?
No, no.
What would he have said?
Oh, I don't know. He probably wouldn't have known. He could go on without knowing things pretty well. He just stayed uninvolved. He liked it that way.
Did you have moments in prison that were scary?
No, oh my goodness. You know, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I went in there. I had asthma. I had health problems. I had stomach problems. I was almost 240 pounds. I was in like the most horrible shape you would ever want to see somebody in. This bloated, couldn't even recognize myself. When I got out now, um, when I got released to the halfway house, I was like 180 pounds. I think my body fat was like 12%. And so, but they scheduled me for this exit medical thing because I had all these flags on my file originally. So when I sat down with that person, they thought they had the wrong person because the
Yeah.
picture didn't, and I looked at it first and I didn't think it was me. And I thought they had the wrong file. And then I'm like, holy crap, that is me. I mean, it was upside down, but
Were you
I couldn't really
exercising in
recognize
prison?
myself.
Or it was
Huh?
just, were you exercising in prison, or was this the lack of
Well,
alcohol
I
and
mean,
drugs?
first I was in a max. I was in, because I got surrendered and I was in the one by the courthouse. That's a maximum security. You don't go anywhere. You don't see the light of day. You don't get up. You're in a two-man cell, what, 19 hours a day, and you get out certain hours for lunch. They lock you back up. Breakfast, they lock you back up, controlled movement and everything. I was there again because I get surrendered. And then, so I had this monitor. My monitor for Florida Lawyers Assistance happened to be the executive director of Florida Lawyers Assistance. His name is Michael Cohen. He set up the attorney assistance program in Florida and New York. He's a very famous guy. He died of cancer a couple of years ago. Phenomenal guy. And Michael, historically, every time I would get in trouble, would get me out of it. Okay. So now my sentence is in February and I'm in custody, and I tell my lawyer, I said, well, listen, I got to have Michael Cohen at my sentencing. And they're like, okay. And then they get a hold of me and they're like, well, Michael's going to be out of town. He can't make it in February. I'm like, well, you got to postpone it. Okay. So now my sentencing gets moved till April. So now I got to sit in this max, and I didn't get moved till almost July because of all that. Okay.
Mm.
So now you're going to ask, was it worth it? So we get to the hearing, we get to my sentencing, and everybody's making their pitch, and so the judge says, well, let me hear from his mind. Let me hear from Mr. Cohen, and because he seems to know him best. And I'm like, I got him right where I want him. And so the judge says, so Mr. Cohen, what do you think I should do? So he says, well, Judge, I've tried just about everything. I think the only thing left to do now is lock him up.
Uh,
This is why I waited 5 months for this.
and and he's probably right.
And he was, oh my God. Okay. So when I get out of prison, there's certain things that have to take place. For instance, I can't reapply for 5 years. Okay.
To the bar.
To the bar. But I can't reapply. I can't reapply unless my civil rights have been restored. Okay. I can't apply to have my civil rights restored while I'm still on supervised release or probation. So when I got out of prison, I had 2 years of supervised release. So after about a year, I came in front of that same federal judge, Judge Leonard, and said, Judge, would you consider giving me early termination? And that at that point, she sees, I was already, preaching at my church, and I had custody of my son. I mean, all these great things were happening. And the judge was so happy. And then she goes, is that guy from the bar here? And he was. Michael was there.
Michael
She goes,
Cohen.
yeah, Judge, I'm here. She goes, you were right.
Wow, yeah.
That was the best thing that ever happened to him.
Man. So let's talk about something. If there's someone listening to this and they're not religious, they're an atheist maybe, can you explain to them what happened to you? Something with God, and you started seeing things differently. How'd that happen?
I, again, grew up in this Roman Catholic and never had any experience whatsoever that would indicate to me there really was a God. Nothing. And it was nonsensical. It was gibberish. I read things. Okay. And the fact that I couldn't read the Bible, or if the Bible wasn't available, it was like a signal to me that, this is, some mystical secret society. Everything I knew about it was wrong. Okay. And so for that person, the person that you're talking about, I would say 93% of those people are people that are misinformed from an early age about a relationship with Christ. Okay. And they think of it as rules and regulations. And let me tell you something. I get to prison on December 18th. You know what the first thing was that I was concerned about? Wasn't losing my license. It wasn't telling my mother I was in prison. You know what the biggest thing I was worried about? I might not be able to make it to the Christmas Mass. And I was brought up to believe that you might as well murder somebody on Easter if you're going to miss Christmas Mass. Okay. And I'm telling you, that was a concern for me. And because all I knew was rules and regulations and you know what I'm saying? That
even though you didn't know what they were talking about in that Mass, you just needed to be there physically. That was your responsibility.
Yes, like you checked off that box. Okay. Why? Because you have to do something. Okay. So I would at least want that person to see if they're one of the 93%. I would want an opportunity to tell that person what I think it really involves. Okay. And how it really works. And if there's still that 7%, well, I respect that. I don't know what to do with them, because I just don't, other than pray for them. But
what happened? Did you go and search for religion? Did it find you? What happened?
Okay. The exact I was okay. So now I wake up in prison, and this is, from, I wasn't expecting this, came out of the blue. It was a Monday morning. It was a typical weekend of drugs and poor sleep. And now I wake up in prison. I'm looking around like, and of course, when people are out of their unit, there's like 120 people in this one little area, it gets a little bit chaotic, I could say, The only place to have any quiet was this little chapel, okay, which was off of, and I only went there to get just away from the noise and the chaos, okay? And so while I was there, and I had no interest in anything, I wasn't seeking God, I wasn't seeking anything. Okay, I was just trying to figure out, I'm wondering when I'm going to have my next panic attack or an asthma attack without an inhaler in prison. I mean, it was, when you think about who I was at that time, and where I was in my, okay, up until that point, I was taking 2 milligrams of Xanax a day. When you suddenly stop taking it, one time I did that, I had a seizure in court. They had taken the house. I didn't remember my phone number later that day. So I'm worried that I'm going to have a seizure because I stopped taking my medicines suddenly. I'm going to have a panic attack, and I'm here in prison. Nobody's going to care, right? I'm gonna have an asthma attack. I don't have an inhaler, and oh yeah, and I'm in prison. Oh yeah, and I'm going to miss Catholic Mass. I'm going to miss Christmas. All these things are going through my head, and I'm like, I just got to get, and I just saw this room, and I'm like, let me just go in here for a minute. So I'm just sitting there, and then I like to read. So now I'm reading these little upper rooms with little books,
little tracks.
Yeah, and so I got to tell you, it was the first time I read anything for the Bible, and the funny thing is, what I'm reading is the exact opposite of what I was led to believe. Okay, come boldly to the throne of grace. No, I was told to come with cap in hand, get yourself right before you come to God. It's so funny. It's you come to God the way you are. His grace superabounds in your weakness. His grace superabounds. Okay, you come to him in your weakness. You come to him when you're done trying to do it on your own, and you've just, it's not about you. It's not about pride. As long as you're trying to do it, God's a gentleman. He'll let you do it. He gave us free will. We're not angels. We're not servants. Okay, which is a big thing that I learned. The Old Testament mentality, the New Testament mentality. We're not servants. We're sons and daughters. It's irrevocable. If people understood the way, at least the way I understood, the way I understand it, my sins, by virtue of Jesus' work on the cross, are forgiven, past, present, and future. Because
how come
every one of my sins is future to his death on the cross?
But how come the Catholic Church, it's Christianity, right? It's the Bible. Is there more of an Old Testament focus in the Catholic Church, and Protestant churches are more New Testament?
It's not. To understand Christianity, you have to understand the Old Testament, okay? And I'll tell you, you've heard of Emmaus retreats.
What is it?
It's a Catholic thing where they'll take people, seekers, for a couple days, and they call it an Emmaus retreat. Yep. Okay. Mm-hmm. But it comes from the story of the road to Emmaus, where after the death of Christ, these two people were walking home and they were very sad. And all of a sudden, Jesus is walking with them. And he's like, why are you so sad? And they're like, well, haven't you heard? Where you been? And they start telling him that this person who they had all their hope and faith in has been killed. And at that point, it doesn't say, and then Jesus opened up heaven and showed them heaven and showed them his scars and started performing miracles. And it says, and then Jesus, without letting them know who he was, started showing himself in the Old Testament, starting with the first 5 books and going through the prophets. Okay. In other words, at the first Passover, that lamb, that baby lamb that they were supposed to bring into their house and love for 4 days, and then they had to kill it and feel sad about killing something they love. That was me. That blood that the angel of death saw outside the house, he couldn't see. The angel of death didn't pass over those houses because the people inside were sinless. he passed over the house because they trusted God and they put his blood outside, and the angel of death could not see through the blood. Just like you've got the mercy seat, you seen the ark, the movies of the Lost Ark and all that stuff. Well, there's three things in the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, there's the budding staff of Aaron to signify man's rejection of God's priesthood. There's the jar of manna, man's rejection of God's provision, and the 10 Commandments, man's rejection of God's law. They're all put in that box. The sum total of our sins is in that box. And then it's covered with what they call a mercy seat, which is fully wood, Arcadia, the hardest wood, and covered with solid gold. It's a picture of Jesus, fully man, wood, fully God, gold. Once a year, the high priest, only the high priest, goes back into the Holy of Holies, has to offer a sacrifice for his own sins, and then for the sins of the people by putting blood on the mercy seat. And there's two cherubim, two big birds, gold birds, looking down on the seat. And the Bible says that those are the eyes of God looking, okay? But just like the angel of death couldn't see through the blood on the doorposts, God can't see beyond. As soon as that blood gets put on there, he can't see the sin. You see what? It's that mercy seat that blinds God to the sin, okay? And so that's what Jesus was saying to the people on the road to Emmaus. That's me, that's me, that's me. It's not like I was just born, it's always been, it's the incarnate me. And now I'm here, okay? And then at the last minute, they're eating and they realize it's him and he disappears. So they go all the way back to Jerusalem. They go to the upper room and they're telling the disciples, we saw Jesus, we saw Jesus. And then Jesus comes through the wall. This is the second time, the disciples hadn't said, this is the second time the folks on the road to Emmaus saw him. And it says that, and then Jesus picked up where he left off and he took them through the Psalms and he took them through the rest of the Old Testament, revealing himself. And the point is, those people on the road to Emmaus did not have any better advantage over us because Jesus revealed himself through the Old Testament to them, not through.
It would be a lot easier for Christians to convert non-believers if there was more of that miracles in front of them. For example, have you ever not thought, it'd be good if once a year God just showed himself and said, hey, I just want to remind you guys, this is the way to go. And we could argue it's, well, that's what the Bible is. But there's other books, right? The Quran for Muslims. Why doesn't God show himself and just make it easy for everybody to make that decision, or a little easier?
Because faith is the substance. It's all about faith and trust. It's not about seeing and feeling and touching. Because why? We think that what's in front of us, the table, the earth, is the real thing, and God is some metaphorical thing. I think it's just the opposite. I think this is the part that's not real. This is the part that's going to be like a dream. When we're in eternity, this is going to be the part that's, because it's time. How does it fit in? Somebody else was here too. How does time work? God, there is no time for God. Imagine being able to look at things in a without being constrained by time. Okay. And that's what people have to understand. That's why he can forgive your future sins, because it's time. It's all in time. It's his time. Everything, the Bible says in Colossians that, when I speak, I've been asked a million times to talk at weddings and stuff like that. And it kills me. Even my last wedding to Jeanette, Christian read Corinthians 13, love is kind, love is patient, love is long, it keeps no record of wrongs. You know what? Now I know from teaching and preaching, that's not for us. And that is such a setup. Okay, because the word there, in the Greek language, you've got many, many words for love. Okay, the word there is agape. We are incapable of agape love, incapable. Okay, because it's completely blind to your prejudices or anything. Okay, incapable. At the end, if you were, I don't know if you ever heard of an interlineal Bible. Okay, after Peter swore that he didn't know Jesus, okay, and the cock crowed. The next time he sees Jesus, it's at the beach, and Peter sees him, he comes over, and now there's a conversation. And if you read the regular Bible, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. It says, Peter, do you love me? Yes, I love you. Feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Yeah, I love you. You know I love you. Read it in the interlineal where you can look at the Greek words being used. Peter, do you agape me? Peter says, I phileo you. You see, phileo is where we get Philadelphia from. Brotherly love.
Brotherly.
Okay. That kind of love is brotherly love. So right before Jesus went to the cross, Jesus said, somebody's going to
deny me
under the bus, right? And I'm going to be put to death. And Peter stood up and said, well, God, I don't know about all these other losers, right? But I love you. And even if all these guys, okay. And you see, because Peter was a picture of somebody to love God with our own strength and our own understanding. Okay. John, on the other hand, when you read the book of John, John refers to himself as the apostle that Jesus loved. Okay. You see, now there's a directional difference. Peter loves Jesus. John knows that Jesus loves him. So during this whole discourse, John is resting on Jesus's bosom. Peter has to ask John, who's he talking about? When Jesus says, well, somebody's going to betray me, Peter didn't ask Jesus. He asked John. Why? Because John's the inside man. John has the inside track. Why? Because John knows that this whole thing works by receiving, not doing or trying or self-efforts.
Yeah. So let me ask you that. That makes sense. That's a good argument.
Here's this picture of self-effort. Now this is where he's being reinstated. He goes from throwing Jesus under the bus to being put in the head of the church. And how does that happen? Through these three sentences. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? It goes from, do you agape me? I phileo you. Do you agape me? I phileo. Do you phileo me? Yes, I phileo. They finally got to the point where Peter understood, receive my love, right? You prove to yourself you are not capable, okay, of doing it the way
Now, Tony, do you have any people in your life that are from the past, from the 80s, 90s? What do they say about the difference? Who is this guy? Who's this new guy?
Well, I mean, that's been a while now because it's been 20 years or so.
Or more.
Yeah.
But anyone else, has anyone, when they knew who you were, drinking, drugs, addiction, all of that going on to where you are today, it's a complete opposite of that. Do you have anyone in your life who's noticed that? Or are they all gone? They're not in your life.
Well, a lot of them are gone. Well, I mean, I've got a brother. I mean, there are of course people that know me from cover.
What do they say?
Nothing. I mean, never said anything at the bottom. Ever, they're just. I mean, that's how we grew up. We weren't this touchy-feely talking about feelings and going to family therapy and we didn't talk about anything.
Yeah, put it under the rug.
Right. Exactly.
Got it. Hey, tell us one more thing. One of the cases that you tried or where you defended, it was Manuel Noriega's nephew.
Yeah, it was Domingo Negretti, and it was funny. I represented him. I had a case in Miami with him, and he was found not guilty. And he's at my office, and he was so excited, and he made me the godfather of his young daughter at the time that was just born. And so while we're there, and I'm actually waiting for my mother to arrive, and somebody spilled ink or something on the floor. And so Domingo's on the floor cleaning this stain, and my mother comes walking in, and she sees this guy, and she thinks that he's the handyman trying to. And she was so surprised that this is Noriega's nephew, and he was telling her, oh, well, he didn't speak much English, but he was trying to tell my mom that he was so happy with me and blah blah blah.
So you
So
win that and you
I meet
become
him.
you win, you become the Godfather. Had you lost, could they have cut your head off or what?
Well, no, actually, the case that you see on the wall did not go as well, and but it is what it is.
Yeah. Hey, Tony, I appreciate you being here and sharing your story because I think this gives a lot of hope to people who are going through something and who feel like they may be hitting rock bottom or getting there. And look where you are today. You got it all back. You're at a better level than you ever were, and I think that's a huge inspiration. I know a lot of guys personally who are going through some stuff, and I think you're going to help them a lot by them listening to this and see how you've turned your life around and where you've gotten to. Thank you, Tony.
I can tell you there are a couple things that might resonate with some of these folks, and I would just give you a couple examples of tangible blessings that I have received that are nothing short of miraculous. Go beyond my physical health getting out. Go beyond the fact, listen, I gave my life to Christ 3 days after that. So I gave my life to Christ on the 21st. By the time my medicine started arriving, a couple days after that, I never needed it. I went into prison with the worst physical, and I'm telling you, if you know anything about anxiety or panic disorder, you would know that the last place you want to be is in jail. The last place. And that's where I got free of it. And the funny thing is, when I woke up the next morning after giving my life to Christ, never thought about cocaine again, never had another panic attack. And now I'm walking around this place like I'm insane because now I've never been so happy. I've had this panic hanging over me for decades. It was this dark cloud. It was the worst depression. I get out of prison. I owed the IRS over $500,000. And as a convicted felon, they actually granted my offer of compromise, and I paid 9 cents on the dollar. Okay. I got custody of my son. I got out in February. I got custody of my son April 11 of 2003, 100% custody. He was in first grade, Coral Gables Elementary. I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't have a law license. I had like $60 that the prison gives you when you leave. And what else? Well, when I married, you met my wife, Jeanette. When we met, I wasn't a lawyer. I was a convicted felon. I was a paralegal and drove an old car. I mean, that's
And
how
when
we
you got
got
when the
involved in
prison
lawyer.
when the prison was able to give you your medication, you didn't need it.
I didn't need it.
That's amazing.
I didn't
Yeah,
need
I
it. That
think
was
you were
for asthma.
described it
That was
well.
from stomach problems. That was for Klonopin, which is another type of benzodiazepine.
I think that's
What else?
amazing.
Oh, you know what? I get out of prison. I get custody of my son, and we go up by our old house in Miami Shores, and we had to take the bus, right? And so we're up there. He's a first grader, and I don't have any money, and there's a Kmart where we used to live by 105th and Biscayne Boulevard there by Quayside. And he's like, "Oh, I'd really like a snack." And the bus was there, the blood bus, right?
Mm.
And I was hesitating because of all my craziness, I never really wanted to find out if I had anything wrong with me, so I was always scared of giving blood or anything because I didn't want to find out I'm dying, right?
Mhm.
But hey, he needs a snack. I'm like, well, I just got to do this. So I go and I give blood, and he gets his famous cookies and soda, and he's happy. Okay. A couple weeks later, I get a letter, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I open it, and it's from Nicholas Hospital saying that that very few people have blood that's good enough to give to preemies, and that my blood is so good that they use it, but the reason for the letter was don't go to the blood mobile because we never get it. Come straight to us, so we know we've got it. And so they asked me to start going to Nicholas Hospital. But again, what you think you deserve and you think what's going to happen is not, and that's just one of a million, examples.
And you've had a full life, Tony. You've really done some stuff, and I think it's amazing that you get to preach at your church and share all this with so many people and teach. Thank you for being here with me and with sharing your story, man. You're a huge inspiration. Thanks, Tony.
No, it's great. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.